Welcome. The following is a sermon presented at First Love Church in Ocala, Florida. If you'd like to know more about our church or Pastors Dennis and Heather Drake, you can find us on the web at firstlovechurch.org.
It was shocking to me when I found out that my doctor friend wasn't always going to be a doctor just because he was a doctor. He has to take a test every few years to stay a doctor. I don't know if you knew that, but so he was like having to study real hard, and I thought, but didn't you go to 12 years of college so that you would become a doctor? But the understanding is that that's an ever-changing field, and he should be sharp, and she should be sharp, and but yet we get our marriage license, and then we're just married forever. And the truth of the matter is, you need to stay sharp so that you can stay married. You know, and so this idea of love mapping would be almost kind of falls into a natural thing when you first get together, because we talk about the things that we want and we find out that our goals and dreams are similar, and so that's what unites us. But in life, people change, life changes, and so that's why sometimes I think we feel that we drift apart. So I think being able to reconnect in this way every so often would be something that would help you stay the course.
And just to be able to say, are we still committed to the same things? Because sometimes you try something and you're like, we really want to do this. We want to be rock stars. And then you get in 10 years and you're like, it's not going well for us. We're not rock stars, you know. And then instead of just being resentful toward those things, sometimes as we grow and change, or as our marriage grows and changes, sometimes there's situations that we can or can't control. Like maybe there is an illness that comes into a situation, or somebody changes jobs or lose jobs, or we've been noticing that
family moves in, moves out. I mean, there's a lot of
there's all these things that we can control and can't control, but being able to say, are we still on course for who we want to be and where we want to get? And this importance of saying, what is the hope for us in knowing each other? And we'll talk later about some other love mapping things that the Gottmans talk about, or you can do the research on your own. It's really beautiful and powerful about being able to say, you understand your spouse and be able to have a map of kind of the things that help you most intentionally express love to them, or really know where they're coming from. But this idea of paying attention to what season you're in, paying attention to, are the things that we were doing before, are they working? Coming back and checking in on those things are important. We've noticed now at 28 years of marriage that we're different people than we were, thankfully, 28 years ago. And so some things that were really important to us in our early 20s are just not super important to us right now. And so you have to go back in, and it's almost like renegotiating the deal. Like come back in for the contract, and we're like renegotiating how this is going to work. Not to get out of it, but to be able to say, how are we both going to stay in it, and stay in it in a way that's healthy and in a way that is respectful of the change that both of us have experienced.
I grew up in a museum in a sense of how my mother kept things clean, and so my wife operates in a different realm in that. Not that she's not clean, but my mom, you could eat off all the surfaces of the floor and everything. And by the way, I might interject to you that I find people that are hyper cleaners to be the angriest people that I've ever met. So if you're a hyper cleaner, you might want to address the deeper issue. Now that's no scientific, but you have a degree and you agree with it? Okay, fair enough.
There's actually a lot of studies that talk about that, because people that are angry want to often control circumstances, and they can't. But we're not talking about being a good housekeeper. We're not talking about that.
But for me, what happened, originally was, I'm thinking that I'm gonna, flex my weight around or demand this enough that Heather will do this thing that in my mind I think is how a house is supposed to be handled. And so what has happened for me is in order for us to get along, I've had to lay down that idea of how I think things should go, or just do it myself. And I know that is a revelation because God forbid I actually be the one that cleans, and so there's a level of servanthood that you kind of see having to rise up, and so that isn't one that's going to come easily for a selfish human being, of which we all are. And so that whole idea of me maybe laying down that thing that I think that there needs to be actually made my life easier. And so I think preconceived notions really can come into the relationship and just set us up for disappointment.
Yes.
When if I kind of renegotiated those things, it would maybe appear like a failure or a loss, but really it's a win, because now I've removed the standard of, we were kind of thinking that our parenting got better when we cut 90% of the rules that we had for our children out. You know, because if you got all these rules, don't wear your shoes upstairs while eating crackers and all, you know, you got to keep track of all that, remember? But when you remove all those weird rules, your kids actually behave better because they're not failing as much, you know? So it's an instant win for you to not try to micromanage and control in that way. And then you kind of teach them and focus on the most important things. And I think that that's what we're able to do in a relationship by having that. So I think sometimes it does, you know, I think it can feel like, you know, a loss or a failure. But if you maybe reimagine that in your mind, it actually is something much better for you.
I like the idea of the reimagining something. I think it's important at the beginning of a relationship to have a plan. And I think that's important to go back and say, is it actually working? Is it actually what we want to do? Or is it beyond what we can control? Do we need extra help? One of the things that we talked about early on in our relationship was that you had a love for music and I had a love for music. And so we understood that music would be a big part, in whatever way it kind of evolved, it would be a big part of our relationship because we both had a love for that. Another thing that was hugely important in our relationship, and it continues to be, is that we met, and our intention was, both of us individually, uniquely, our intention was that we're going to follow God. And so we have made it a practice, not just because we're pastors. In fact, when we met, we weren't pastors. We've made it a practice that we are going to have God at the center of our relationship. And by saying God, not a God that we like have a figment of our imagination, the God of the Bible, the God of Jesus, who places some demands on the way that we would love each other and the way that we have. Now, let me tell you, that's what we did that was good. What we forgot to do was negotiate and pay attention to the fact that we each came from such different families that we would come to this marriage with these idea of how our families behaved and how our families operated. And I kind of thought that once you saw how cool I was at doing these kind of things, like you would just be like swallowed up in all this really great technique.
Well, and I was convinced if you gave me enough time, I would make you the person that I thought you ought to be.
And so you can understand that to be a very difficult process and actually very painful for both of us, as I felt a lot of rejection and a lot of resentment because you weren't doing things the right way. And you felt,
the exact same way. You know, before we go into that kind of family thing, though, I do want to talk about one other thing that you and I kind of came into the marriage in agreement with, is that, you know, you had been trained as a nanny, and I think fully intended that you wanted children.
We wanted family,
I
yes.
wanted family, and I ever since I was a little kid, I thought there's got to be a better way than the way these people are treating me, and I'm going to make sure that when I have kids, you know, and sadly there were things that I just repeated out of not knowing anything different, but I bring that up for the reason that it is amazing, and maybe you need to ask yourself, how much am I just kind of flying by the seat of my pants in this marriage? And by that, I just mean we're kind of letting things happen. We'll just see how it goes, falling into place. But I will remind you, Scripture says very clearly, without a vision, people perish, or people cast off restraint is a better translation. And so I don't want Heather casting off restraint, nor does Heather or anyone want me casting off restraint. So us having a vision in your marriage about, you know, and again, like I said, you stumble on it naturally when you get together because you're like, oh, you want to do that? I want to do that. But but revisiting that maybe every few years, of a vision board, kind of, this is the direction we're going to go, or kind of have the tough decision even after this class tonight. Where do you see our marriage going from here? Because Heather and I kind of feel like we're bumping at some point here very closely into a crossroads, because I'm just so jealous at you. I don't even want to talk right now. You're a grandma. I don't have no grandbabies. You're a grandpa back there, Tab. I love that. I see that is like the next crossroads, And so what kind of a grandparent do you want to be? I'll never forget when David, my third, was a year and a half years old, and my brother dropped off his kids while him and his wife went to Las Vegas. He had a 4-year older kid, and then, come on in, have a seat. He brought in or dropped off his 4-year-old and his 1.5-year-old little daughter, and the two of them had the flu.
So this was fun.
So I've got my little David, the baby with the flu, and his kid. And my wife decides that is the day she's going to, no, she already had it scheduled.
No, it was already
She's
planned.
going to fly to Florida and spend, because I lived up in Chicago at the time. So what happened was, my brother was supposed to be back from Vegas, but they were using those standby tickets, and they said, we're going to postpone your flight a day. So now I have 2 babies, no wife. Well, of course, there's 5 kids in the house, but 2 of them are babies with the flu. And I mean, they're throwing up all over, and I'm freaking out because I'm not good with that. So I was like literally laying wet towels over piles of vomit all over the house, and I'm just waiting until like I could get some help. So I called my mom, and I said, Mom, because my brother's her favorite, so I'm like, your favorite, his kids are over here, and I need some help with them. And she goes, well, I've got a lunch appointment with my friends. I said, I know, but they got the flu. No one could plan this. And like my mother-in-law, she gets off work at 5, but I really genuinely need some help. And she was like, I have lunch plans. Figure it out. And that was kind of like that reinforcement that she was laying the gauntlet down of what kind of grandmother she was going to be. When she was available, there was a couple times a year that she would call and say she wanted to take the kids to lunch. So she would call, come grab the kids, take them to lunch, and then say that she's the grandmother that spends time with kids. Well, that's where her level of input or, involvement was. And so, Heather and I are here. I said all that to say that we're at this place going, we want a different level of input, in with our grandkids. I want to throw down. I wanted someone to have my back when things were, so I've got to be willing. So Heather and I have to have those hard discussions, like how are we going to have to maybe trim back the self-centered things, Because some people go, well, at this age, you start up new hobbies. No, I need another hobby like I need another hole in my head, right? I'm going to need to have time for when the kids say, they want to renovate a house. I want to show up there and help them with that. So we're having these kind of discussions because what is the next few years of your marriage going to look like? If you just let it happen, okay, sarah, sarah, right? Whatever will be. But if you really sit down, what kind of grandparents do you want to be? What kind of marriage do you want to have with each other? Well, then I'm going to commit to classes like this because I want further training so that I can be closer. So really, I hope that this class here would just motivate some conversations for you to have that discussion. And then I love hearing Heather's vision and dreams because, that's a beautiful vulnerability that she shares with me. And then I want to be a part of helping that come to pass. And so it's not no, we can't do your thing because we're doing my thing. We figure out how our thing can really dovetail together and be something really wonderful. And so I want you to think about that.
You painted a really beautiful picture of that, but sometimes the other side of that picture, the other side of the
might
light,
be duking it out, right?
is the darker side of the side of going, it's not working. We've tried this and it's not working. Now, it doesn't mean that just because something is not working it needs to be abandoned. Sometimes you need to take it to a repair shop. Sometimes you need to get some other help in. But you need to be able to look at your specific and say, maybe we're not going to be rock stars. Maybe we should do something else. Maybe we should invest in this, or maybe we should take the time to go, is it not working because we're both not in agreement or investing in this same idea and in this same plan, having a specific intention. And one of the things that we've talked about is, for Dennis and I, we want to be friends. The kids are going to grow up, and we want to really know each other and not work on friendship when we're 60 and have lived our whole life. Or we're not going to be without children by the time we're 60. We're joking. We have Silas, who's still pretty young.
Well, that's why you end up, though, oftentimes with that empty nest syndrome, is because you invested, and really had a child-centered home. And now when the children are gone, you have nothing that you really built. And so we want to make sure, the whole time you're building your relationship.
And you're intentionally building. What does it mean for us to know what our partner or our spouse is looking for, and being able to say, what can we do to foster growth, to encourage imaginative ideas, and to really say, this is what we want to do, and so we'll do the hard things in order to get where we want to go. If we put it in the GPS and it's a really long route, we make plans for provisions, for gas, for stops along the way, and recognizing that our intention is in marriage, that we would be married to each other for the rest of our lives. That's a long road, hopefully. And so how are we making provisions to get to where we really want to go? I think part of that is really looking at our relationships and going, what's intruding? What comes into our relationship and causes stress? A lot of the stress that we have in our relationship is expectations. And most, I think importantly, the ones that we feel are unmet. And a lot of times we don't talk about expectation. We just assume that since that other person loved us, see, if I'm working really hard at something and I'm sweating and I'm doing all the work, and you come in and you're just standing there with your arms crossed and you're watching me do that kind of work, that's fine, but I don't suspect you love me if you do that. I would just tell you my expectation. Because my expectation is, if you love me, you're going to throw down with whatever I'm doing. You're not going to stand there and, let me tell you the funny story about what I'm going through. I'm like, grab a broom, dude, these kind of things, like, show me. But this is my expectation, that unless I talk about and unless I actually have a plan to discuss, then that's really what fuels resentment, or that's really what feels like we are singles living separate. It's not about housework. It's about whatever we're doing. If we feel like we're the only one doing the work, then that's where it becomes a difficulty.
Now, I want you to paint a picture. I went to 8th grade twice, but by the time I was 20, I got tested and found out I had dyslexia, so I didn't know that my whole life, and so I just thought I was dumb and couldn't do good in school. And turns out there was an issue there, but of course I didn't know that. That kind of information really wasn't available when I was a small child, and so needless to say, reading and those kind of things wasn't a hobby like she can devour a book in a night. For me, I'm like, well, are you being punished? Why would you have a book? That's what you do when you got in trouble, you were made to read, or something. And so just the way we look at things are differently. And so Heather doesn't know that. And so I would come home from work, and there'd be a letter in the mailbox, and it would be squishy thick. Like she crammed so much letter, words into an envelope that it was actually not a flat envelope. It was bulbous, And then I'm like, oh God.
I'm sharing my heart.
She's going to test me on this. Did you read it? Once you get to the part about, so I'm going to have to read this now. And now I'm feeling anxiety and pressure and aggravation. And so I go home, and you come home from work, and if you're a man, where are you probably going to go? You're going to sit on your throne, right? So I go in and I tear open the letter, and now confetti flies out of it and fills my underwear. So now I'm angry because I got to read this giant letter and pick out tiny little hearts out of my drawers. And I'm going to be tested on this whole flipping thing. And so there's this kind of like unspoken expectation, that this is what you're going to love, and this is what love is, And Heather, I'm finally going, can you, I love you, but can you, maybe just tell me in an oral exam, I have to be, you mean you don't like, my favorite, she's telling me my favorite thing in the world is to get a letter. So she's writing me a letter, and so she's giving me the thing that is just absolutely the pinnacle of a demonstration of love, and it is absolutely a medieval torture device for me. So we have to kind of understand, and have some communication, because then she would go by the Baker Square and buy me a slice of pie or a Rice Krispie bar and put it in a bag, and I'm like, oh, that woman loves me. And you find that thing, and that takes a real adjustment, because here she is pouring out her heart, and now she's getting a Rice Krispie bar, So it's like finding that thing, but yet you have to kind of communicate. Are these really the things that I want to do? So I'm force-feeding my partner, disappointed with them, because they're not responding the way that I think they ought to by this huge gesture of my love, when again, it really kind of does boil down to, we've studied love languages. Hopefully all of us have had some influence by that book, and so we understand people receive it and give it in a completely different way.
But even understanding love languages, though it is a part of that, and it's a way that we can express and really help ourselves communicate with each other, but really looking at the way that we live our lives and asking ourselves the difficult question, how does my idea of family intrude, or my commitment or my idea of loyalty to family intrude on the family that we are making now? Because we remember that our history, it comes with us into the relationship. We all come into relationships with baggage and with family history and, family of origin baggage. But if we're not aware of how the families have taught us to operate, there are some things that are kind of almost on autopilot, or there are some things operating in us kind of behind the scenes. I don't know if you've ever had a device and you're like, I don't know why the battery is drained, and there is something that is draining the battery, but there's an app going. And I think sometimes that happens to us in our marriage. Like I don't know why this is not working. There is an app working and draining battery behind the scenes, and to be able to say, what does it look like for us to reimagine what our family, and by ours I mean the person in the marriage, what our family will be, and how we want to react to the world, how we want to react to each other, and what our intention is, so that we can be successful or fruitful or faithful in whatever it is that we choose to be.
For me, by putting some language to this, to understand that there's a thing called triangulation with your family of origin, and how it is affecting you. And I guess, we when we started with therapy, we talked about family of origin, and it was like the beginning of the language of kind of understanding what's going on. And I think that we used to always say, even from the beginning of our marriage, like that's a Drake thing or that's a Rasmussen thing. Her maiden name Rasmussen, my name Drake. And so we would kind of, she would say.
So most of the time it would happen like when the kids were acting up, she goes, those Rasmussen kids are wound up again. Rein that in. It was always like toward the negative. Or
Yeah. And that's a Drake thing. Or she would kind of approach it as a Drake way of doing things. And oftentimes that was a negative connotation, but it was very offensive to me, because that's my tribe, that's my people, that's where I come from. And so I felt the obligation to defend it. And I didn't realize just how much of it maybe I accepted without even really considering, do I want to live that way? Do you know what I mean? Like, you just grew up that way. So you never sat and decided, I pick that for my life. Or, like, for example, yelling. I don't want to be a home that screams. Well, the loudest person won the argument in my home. The loudest person got the floor. So I bring that into the marriage. Well, Heather is from a family that they just didn't raise their voice at each other, So
I thought he was broke. Like there was something happening. Like, why are you yelling?
And I'm like, well,
listening.
That's a Drake thing. I'm
No.
like, no, that's a human thing. That's what you do. And I got, so I've got to do, and I didn't really stop and think of, because here it is now, 28 years of us being married, and we've sat down and said, that's not what we want for our home. But as you know, there are things that are deeper woven in you than just by you deciding I don't want. And so just yesterday I was playing wiffle ball with Silas, and he kept throwing the ball, turning his body and throwing the arm this way. And I kept saying, no, you turn your body and throw from behind you. And so I'm telling him, and like maybe 20 times in a row. So I got my, I said, Silas, turn your body, and I was just trying to I wasn't realizing, but I was escalating. I wasn't mad, but I certainly, wasn't calm. And he goes, you know what? We've played enough for today. And I was just so amazed that as a 6-year-old, he did not want any part of that. And I think just how different that is, because Thomas grew up that was a good day when that's all the yelling that took place, And so we are seeing progress. But again, for me initially, when Heather's confronting me about this, I really felt like I needed to defend the Drakes. I needed to defend my way of life, instead of me realizing now at this point, that's not something I wanted or want now, And so I think for me, understanding triangulation is really understanding how much the things that happened to me in my past and in my family, how much they are affecting me now. And I want us to talk about it a little bit, because if you don't have awareness, I believe awareness is such a powerful gift from God, because until you have awareness about something, it usually just continues to fester, it continues to manifest, it continues just to exist. But once you, wait a minute, and I realize this about myself, now I can bring it to the Lord. I can bring it to my brothers and sisters to help me address it, adjust it. I can actually get information, another way of handling things. And so I think that this brings some awareness, doesn't it?
I think the important thing that we need to remember, we say it a lot in the marriage ceremony, but I don't think we pay attention to it a lot in marriages, is the loyalty in a marriage is supposed to be to the person that you're married to. And this idea is that this is, you've chosen a partner, and it's you and that partner kind of against the world, and certainly against people or against situations and conflicts that are constantly trying to divide and constantly trying to come against. And so this idea is paying attention to the loyalty between these two people. What do we want to do? What choices are we making? How are we going to live our life? And for you and I, it became really important, and it was beautiful, because we understood that then there would be some help for us in looking at the life of Jesus, and in how we would forgive each other, and how we would practice the things. And there are some really important disciplines in the Christian faith, or in any kind of, in fact, faith-filled modality, where we're saying, you know what, these kind of practices shape us to be people who can continue in these relationships, but paying attention to the loyalty between, this is how we are making a decision, that we are going to talk to each other, that we're going to recognize each other's strengths, or in fact, depending on what area you are in your marriage, also each other's weakness. For a long time in our marriage, I didn't have a large hernia, and I was very strong and could work right along with you. And then we had a situation where I had a hernia, and then even had to replace a surgery, and it didn't work out. And I have this weakness now that we have to make a lot of accommodations for. That and so that happens in marriages, where something happens, we didn't plan on it, but now we have to intentionally to guard up the loyalty between what decisions are we intentionally making, or we just become roommates, people that share the same car and the same house, and we try to make things work. But this idea of this loyalty produces this friendship and this closeness, and what are we doing to make sure that we don't have divided loyalties?
When you read that scripture, it says that you leave your parents' household and you cleave to your spouse, and it instructs in Genesis for the husband to leave his family for the wife, and then there's another place
in the
Psalms where it instructs the woman to leave her family and connect with her husband. And so there really is for you a severing that probably just in our culture isn't really promoted and doesn't happen, and so we don't recognize, hey, there's a new sheriff in town. I mean, there's just a new way of doing things. We're doing something different, and so much of that intrudes. And I got to tell you, I think one of the biggest mistakes that I observed that Heather made, that I can say in
wait
hindsight,
a second, I was going to say.
I can say that
he's going to say my biggest.
Well, I mean, I think that it's in your defense, but I think that if you would agree that if I share this with people, it would help them not have the pain that we had. That my wife decided in her mind that
don't do this.
that my mom had me for 24 years, so that it wasn't going to be until we were married 24 years.
I don't know why that logic made sense to me. But at 24 years, I was laying down the law. We are not doing it.
And this is what, see, my mom would do things like, when she came to our house, she would move my wife's place setting and sit down right beside me at the table. And I didn't think anything about it because that's my mom. She's controlling, she's pushy, she just does, So for me, that's par for the course. And my wife, for 24 years, she put up with that. Well, that's your mom, and she's had you for 20. But then my wife goes, I've been married to you. It's like 24 in one day. She would go, you've been with me longer than that one, so you ain't going to do that stuff anymore. But I wish
I shouldn't have done
that
from
we
day
would have
one.
handled
We
that
should have
23 years earlier, and had the hard conversations because that caused her a lot of pain. And for me, it was a lack of awareness because because I'm seeing the people here, guys and girls, just shaking your head like that is crazy to you that my mom behaved that way. But I got to tell you, my normal was just with triangulation was really like my mom got her emotional needs met from me and my brother because my dad checked out. So my mom would say, hey, after work, meet me and I'll buy you dinner. So we'd go to very nice restaurants and my mom would buy dinner. So really, we're on a date if as adults, for lack of a better word. Now, I didn't see it that way, but to realize there's something going on here, and then when it comes time for birthdays, my dad never bought my mom a Christmas present or a birthday present in all the time so that duty fell on me and my brother.
So when we're newly married and we're spending so much money on his mother's birthday, I'm like, dude, that's a little bit weird, but this is my mom.
She's like,
and so I'm like,
send a card.
Yeah,
and I'm like, send a card to my mom? Well, don't you know that's the woman who birthed me? And so she had totally kind of promoted this idea of her greatness in my life because she was protecting herself, right? And so you may find yourself in that story, but then you also may not be able to relate to that in the slightest because, Heather and I were talking, and this is a hard conversation, and really this is her story to tell, but her triangulation is actually the opposite because when Steve came home from the Vietnam War, he decided that heroin and vodka were going to be his relationship. So he never came back. So Heather, as a 2-year-old child, had to begin to realize she's not chosen. Where I am chosen to this place of uncomfortable. Like, my mom wanted physical touch from me. And I'm now the kind of person that I'm not a physical touch person. Like, if you put your arm on me, I shake, and it's subconsciously, and I'm realizing just now as a 51-year-old man where that comes from. Because I was leeched on to provide physical touch. I'd be sitting in a chair, and my mom would come scoot right next. Come on, it's a couch. I would think, look how big it is. Oh, no. And then cuddling and want to hold my hand. And I'm like, how long do I have to do this, And I, that was my benchmark. That was my normal, And so now, so triangulation, what it does, is now it affects this relationship. Because first of all, maybe I'm not aware of how weird that is, or I'm pushing her aside because... And I tell you, while I'm on my stint of this, is just, for me, my mom would lie worse to look at you. If the truth was easier, she'd lie. And so for years, my wife would say things to me, and I didn't realize just how deep that rabbit hole was, just how serious that problem was. But I didn't believe just about anything the woman said. And she'd say to me, how much more of years can we live together and of life that I could pour out and prove that I'm an honest person, but yet you doubt every word I say? See, that's deep in me because of that family issue, because of the constant manipulation, the constant lies. And again, you might not be able to relate with those stories at all, but your triangulation might be the exact opposite, that because of the disconnect or the not being chose by your family, and some people say that's even worse.
And we've asked in a few of the sessions ago to ask your spouse what it was like to be chosen in your family of origin, or what it was like to be not chosen. What did it cost you? And because for many of us it did cost us, and it continues to be a toll that we pay if we're not aware that sometimes these ideas or these thoughts or these hurts or traumas that have happened because of our family of origin, if we don't take the time to actually explore them and talk about them and pay attention to them. One of the things that happened for me, and is part of when Dennis is talking about triangulation, it's this idea that you would go to somebody else instead of the person. It's very opposite of, it's not a Christian method of communicating. In fact, Jesus encourages us to go to the person who has offended us, but it happens in many different ways, sometimes intentionally, but a lot of times unintentionally. And it can happen in marriages to such an effect that it ruins a lot of marriages. If I'm having a problem with Dennis and I don't know how to talk with him about it, sometimes it's easier for me to go to another person and start talking about it, but that really doesn't always help, because sometimes I'm just providing my side of the story and I just want sympathy. And so then that person feels now the burden of this, and they feel resentment toward Dennis. And now you see we have a really weird triangle of how this happens, and put them in that situation. And I'm not talking about going to a therapist or to a doctor or to a counselor to get help, because they typically know ways to stay out of that triangle. But this idea of then I'm going to just complain about this person, and I'm not actually going to do anything that would be helpful or intentional to get the needs met. I mean, we can look at the situation that you shared with your mom. She really should have gone to your dad and said, I don't think you're meeting my needs. Instead, she just went to somebody else and said, can I have my needs met? And she didn't even say it. She kind of just pushed those on you. And if we're not mindful, this is the kind of things that produce division in us, and then produce in us these expectations that aren't being met, that aren't being filled. And, there's just hope for us in paying attention to the subtle ways that things work.
I thought you were going to start to say there's something that I found out about Heather far later in our marriage than I wish I had, because my conversations with Heather have gone a lot like this. You ought to buy that thing that you're interested in. No, I don't think so. Well, you really like that. Why don't you get that? No. Where do you want to eat? Wherever you want to eat. Where would you like to go? Oh, I'd like to go there. Well, let's go there. Well, I don't know if we should spend the money. So there's this kind of response, that I've gotten from her, and I'm like, well, does she just not care? And so I'm a type A personality. I'm like, well, we're going to Taco Bell because that's where I want to go. Instead of learning to take the time with her to really find out where is it that you want to go to eat, because there's this overwhelming drive in her to not buy the thing that she wants to, which many men would consider a tremendous victory. My wife is not depleting the finances buying stuff for herself all the time. In fact, to get her to buy something is I consider a tremendous victory, And but to dig deep and find that out, oftentimes we won't go there. And it was much later in our marriage than I would hope to that she told me a story one time of
I didn't, when I was telling you the story, I didn't realize how much of an impact that had made on my choices. I was just...
Well, yeah, tell the story, and then I want everybody to see how that makes, how that explains why you don't decide to buy yourself the thing or to pick the restaurant or whatever.
So I was really aware as a small child growing up that my dad was not there, and I really wanted him to be there. And we had contact with him, so we could, the adults in my life could ask him to come to things and could invite him, and they would talk to him on the phone, and he would promise to come, but he wouldn't show up. And so that became a huge pain for me, this idea of you promised, but then you don't come. And
I mean, time after time, he would say, I'll be here, and so she would actually fall asleep out on the front porch.
I would just wait on the front porch for him to get there, and I remember many times my grandfather actually being outside all day long waiting, and my grandfather actually picking me up because I was asleep out there and carrying me upstairs to bed as a small child, and he just wouldn't come. And this was on my 6th birthday, so many moons ago, my neighbor had a new bike, and I really wanted one, and I had a birthday coming, and it was this purple Schwinn bike with a banana seat and had the long tassels, and I just thought that was the coolest bike. And so I asked for that bike, and people were like, what are you going to have for your birthday? I was like, I want a purple Schwinn bike with a banana seat and the long tassels, and that's what I really want for my birthday. And I came down the stairs of our big house on my birthday, and at the bottom of my stairs was that bike, the purple Schwinn bike with the banana seat and the streamers, with a little note in it that said, I love you, Dad. And I can remember sitting down on the stairs and just crying because I hated that bike. I didn't want that bike. I just wanted my dad. And I felt like this is what happened. I felt like I asked for the wrong thing. What I really should have said was, I want you to be in my life. I really want this. And I just can't remember that bike. I hated that bike. I never rode the bike, much to my grandfather's chagrin. And he's like, I'll get you a bike at the flea market. It'll be fine. Thank you, Tim. And so there's this hope of saying, I'm sorry about the bike, but this idea then became in my mind, you asked for the wrong thing. What you really wanted, you didn't get because you didn't know how to ask for it. So for the rest of my life, I mean, really, it has become a problem for me to know exactly what I want, because I'm like, you're only going to get the one thing. Like, I would have wanted more than anything for my dad just to show up for my birthday. But in fact, he left the bike, which was really a beautiful, wonderful gift. And that's really all he could do. I mean, in his own pain, that's the best that he could do. But that's not what I saw, and that's not what I took out of it. And unconsciously, I had made this kind of agreement then. So don't ask for anything until you really know it's exactly what you want. But that becomes a terrible liability for everyone else to try to have to prove that this is what you really want.
Well, and for me, it read differently. It read, that she's not invested. It didn't matter to her where we go to eat. Apparently she just doesn't care. Or she's not really interested in, stuff or anything. Where's your passion, woman? And it's like, and when I found that out, see, and that's the thing. It's like, we can just blow past it. Good, because we're eating where I want to eat all the time. This is a great deal. And for much of my marriage, it just fed my selfishness, because my favorite person is me. And so I got to do everything I wanted to do. And there was extra money because she wasn't buying anything. So guess what? I got all my toys and all my stuff. And so this was a beautiful scenario for the selfish. But then I'm not growing, and certainly she's not content or considered in the marriage, So it takes pushing past sometimes these things and really finding out how, because I want you to see how different that is. My mother's overwhelming need for me caused me to be the wreck that I am. Her father's inability to be in her life, to be there for her, need her, made her the wreck that she is. And now these two wrecks met up and said, we're going to get married and we're going to have an awesome marriage. Good luck with that. And I have a feeling there's a wrecks all over this place, and we met in this broken place. And so if we don't really understand that maybe that weirdness, and I love that question that we asked the couples, and that you would ask yourself, what was it like to be chosen or to not be chosen? Because for some people it's like, ooh, the not chosen people would say, oh, to be chosen, how great that is. But the burden, the cross that is to bear for the chosen one is much worse, maybe in some cases. But then the loneliness, who's to say what's worse? But I think really having that compassion for each other, and then really understanding, wow, this stuff is intruding on my marriage right now. So then Heather and I are able to just kind of look at that and go, wow, that is the kind of, family we grew up in. That's the kind of reflex or go-to decision we're going to make, unless her and I really discuss, we are not going to do this with our children. We're not going to treat each other this way. We're going to intentionally, my parents are what's called married singles. And that means they're married, but they live the life of a single person. My dad went and fished with his buddies every week. My mom went and got her hair done or went out to lunch with her friends every week. And they would just go home, and he brought this amount of money home, and she made this kind of food, and she sewed his things, and he mowed her grass. And so they had an arrangement, and that was my example of a marriage. But her and I have sat down and said, we're not going down like that, We want to have a real friendship. My parents, I never once saw them go anywhere without another couple with them. Like, I can't tell you how many times they said, hey, I want you and Heather to go with us to Cedar Key. And I'm like, you're retired. You have a car. It's filled with gas. Go to Cedar Key. You have a GPS. I bought it for you. But for them, it was unimaginable to go together and be each other's company. That just wasn't, and that's really sad, isn't it? But see, they came about that honestly, because they never invested. They never sat down and said, what kind of, older people do we want to be? You know, what kind of marriage do we want to have? What kind of grandparents do we want to be? I have a lot of friends now that are you know, because all my friends roughly are my age, you know, and so we're transitioning between our children moving out of the house, and I see a lot of them going, well, now it's our time. We're going to go to the beach. We're going to go live at the beach. We're going to go do, you know, it's going to be, and they become these real selfish, self-centered people. And I mean, Heather, talking about what if at this transition we shift into high gear in giving our lives away to God? You know, this is a real crossroads for us that we decide in these moments in our life, how can we be more Christ-like? How can we be more loving to our children? Are you just living for your children to get out of the house so you can, you know, I want them to be in my life for the rest of my life. I want a good, healthy relationship with them where I can serve them and be around the grandkids and live that life. So I have to make decisions, and her and I have to have serious conversations about that.
And we have to talk about what kind of willingness we are making towards sacrifice. What will we be willing to sacrifice so we can have the things that we really truly say that we want to have? And for some of us, it's not just the family of origin that brings baggage. Some of it's from past relationships. If you have other marriages that are not a part of where you are today, there's hurts and baggages that come from there. But there's also maybe some things that are some apps that are still running from those things as well, and being really attentive to this. Again, if you look up the information from the Gottman Institute, they have a lot of information about love maps and really spending time to find the space in your partner. And why do you, I mean, so for Dennis, he's not one day just going to say, hey, this would be a really exciting day. We're just going to go spend a bunch of money. I would probably throw up with just that idea. And for some
That's
other person,
not far from a possibility to something that
I'm
would
just
happen.
saying though, but because he loves me and knows that if we're going to do something, if we're going to buy something, I want it to be very thoughtful, and I want to spend very intentionally, and I want to have done the research, and I want to make sure it's the exact one, and this can be a really long, drawn-out process. But because he loves me and he knows this is part of the thing, I think that it's important for us to drop these love maps for each other, to be able to say, I understand that because of what you experienced, and because, again, we know where our GPS is going. We've put in a destination. We want to be friends, and we want to be in each other's lives, and we want to be serving the world and a part of people whose lives, at the end of it, have some kind of a legacy. I mean, we don't want to just be here and suck up air. You know, that our intention is, how can the world be better because we were friends and we invested? Yeah. And there's hope for us in really learning the practices, spending time to have the conversations, and then having the conversations again. Is it still working? Dennis was talking about, there was a list that he was making of all the projects that were around the house, and you know, he said jokingly, but he's going to have to live to about 120 to get all the things done that we want to do there.
Yeah.
So that's good, because you have to have a reason to live. You know, and there's like this is a really long list.
I've promised my wife so many projects.
But we were talking about this, and he had a really good idea. Let's prioritize it. Let's just not make the list. Let's make it the number one thing. And he had a lot of things that felt like number one, and I kept firm on the shelves. When we first got married and we decided that we wanted to have a house together, and we dreamt up the house, and then, you know, we were married 14 years before we have the house that we have now. And 18 years before we have the house that we have now. And this is a house that Dennis built. But when we were dreaming up the house and we were dreaming up how the things would go, in our dreams, there was going to be shelves in the laundry room. And Dennis builds everything in the house, so it's not just like, you know, we didn't get around to it. You know, everything is hand-built, and it's beautiful, and it's really intentional. And Dennis was asking about the list, and he was like, you know, so we have all these other plans. And I'm like, the shelves in the bathroom, the shelves in the laundry room. And he's like, yeah, we'll get to those. I'm like, it's been 10 years. I want to put the tide on the shelf. And so sometimes, though, if we're not aware of renegotiating or saying what's important or how are we going to get these things done, then we can just live with resentment or be angry.
It's such a good point, because, you know, shelves aren't romantic. They're not awesome, you know, like doing some cool landscaping in the yard or fixing, you know, something that will be fun.
Yeah,
for
no
us
one's going to see the laundry room except for me.
An outdoor kitchen would be much more cool to invite people over, a fire pit or something that's on the list of all these things that we would have to do. But for her to really find and make her space, you know, and that's difficult for because of her family of origin, to find, the gumption to make that space for herself. And so that's a place of vulnerability. So I would ask if you are, kind of that type of personality like I am, and you're inviting your spouse out of their behind the wall or out of the shell or whatever, and then they come out and you pulverize them, you're not, and for me it was difficult because I can remember, Courtney helping us so much as a psychotherapist, going through, or a therapist, however you word it, but she would be like, encouraging Heather to say these things, and then Heather would say them not, she's new at confronting me and saying these, so she might not say it in the best language, and if her language wasn't what I liked, I punished her for it, not intentionally, but through my hurt or my anger or whatever, and here I am inviting her out into that place. And so I really want you to see that if you have this spouse that wants to sit down and negotiate the shelves, and you're like, shelves are stupid, or that's not, it's like, you're really, you might win the battle but lose the war. You might really be shooting yourself in the foot, because I've always said I want this partner. I want her to be free to communicate to me, so that when she does, then I shut it down. Because again, from my family, you want to win. You got to be louder. You got to be pushier, and so that triangulation brings. I'm bringing it in, and not realizing it doesn't serve me. You survived in that home because you did what you had to do to survive. But we're not in survival mode now. We're in thriving mode, or we should be. And so that means I got to shift some things, and I really have to kind of look at what we can do. And maybe I have lived so much of my life in kind of that survival mode or whatever. But I'm excited about the idea of thriving. Means I begin to plant some delicate plants, and I care for them, and I'm not a bull in a china shop on how I behave towards her, and we're cultivating some new things.
And not just in the way that you behave toward me, but the way that I am responsible and respectful of your unique viewpoint and the perspective that you bring.
That's a nice way of saying how I behave.
But there's a unique viewpoint that you have, and a perspective that everyone has based on who they are and what they have lived through, and the things that they have experienced. And so often we just assume people can see it the same way that we do. And taking time to actually ask questions of each other. When you said this, what did you mean? And not in a way that is hurtful, or for clarification. Yeah, can you give me more information? Sure. Or I'm curious about why that's super important to you. We've had friends, and we were talking with them, and we were discussing a trip for 4 of us, and the wife said she would like a really relaxing vacation, and then she began describing what the relaxing vacation was, and I'm telling you, it was horrific when she was telling me what it was going to be. At 5 a.m. we can get up and we can see the sunrise, and then we can be at breakfast by 6:15. At 6:15, and she had the entire day mapped and filled with things, and she called that a relaxing vacation. And so I was thinking how disappointed I would have been if I showed up for that relaxing vacation. And I think very often we do that in marriages. Like if somebody says, what I would like to do is have a relaxing Saturday. Well, what does that Saturday look like to you? How does relaxing tell me what that looks like. Explain that to me. Now I want to tell you, we went on the trip with that person, and we had the best time. But we knew it was not going to be relaxing. We were like, we're going on a marathon, and we're going to be so tired when we get home. But it was going to be so good. But we knew what we were getting into because of further discussion. I think we have to do that with spouses.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, you kind of do that because for the first part of our marriage, I very much would. One of the things that Heather really appreciates is quality time with me, and I'm like, what do you mean I spent no time with you this week? Don't you remember Monday night we sat in the living room while I watched the Bulls game and the Hawks game, and then I think I did some work on guitar practice and charted some songs, and we were sitting on the couch together for 6 hours. How can you tell me that you're this black hole of need, woman? Get away! I mean, I spent all this time with you. I mean, here I am thinking I'm this amazing dude, and and it's like, and her definition of quality time, I've come to realize is absolutely correct. being in a room with another person is not quality time. I'm sorry to break somebody's heart on this one, but in my mind, we were together, But I was doing my own thing. Again, I was trained by, this might have landed too close to somebody. But see, again, I was trained by married singles. So I mean, this is, you're together, and so Heather had to help me understand that she was not cared for, or attention was not given, and then you realize, man, this is a whole different level than things I understand. And so having those conversations and because had she let that fester, she would have built resentment towards me. And just disappointment, and the whole time I would have been deceived into thinking, I'm the husband of the hour, So where's my rewards, I am, this is amazing how I live. And so really making sure that you guys are explaining and your definitions are really the same. And just because they're different doesn't mean that the bully wins whose definition takes precedent. I think really the key is hearing that other person, and then going from that point on, if I want that to happen, I want to, to do it the way that you would like that. And then, but I think also too, that does bring in the point of really being able to verbalize, what my intention was, that my heart was good towards you, and moving on from that place.
We're going to ask you to do a practice this month while we're between the sessions, and I want to invite you to do this practice. We've been doing a few practices. I hope that you're spending a little bit of time looking eye to eye at your spouse. We spent a time listening to a song together and looking directly into each other's eyes. In fact, there's a therapy that can be done where you sit in silence and look directly into each other's eyes and intend to tell someone something just through eye contact. And there's an incredible connectivity that is actually formed when you spend time practicing looking at each other's eyes. We were talking with Silas about something, and he's 6, so we still talk about things like stop and look. We were crossing a road, and we were saying, pay attention, be aware, stop, look, and listen. And I was thinking we really need to do that all the time when our spouse enters the room. We're so very used to, just all of the commotion and all of the things that happen that we forget to look into each other's eyes and listen to what your spouse is actually saying. So we would throw that out there. But we would encourage you this month to just spend in the evening, write one thing that you were kind of impressed with, grateful for, or amazed that your spouse did, or who they were. Maybe you saw something they did for someone else, or how they responded to you. And then don't give it to your spouse for the entire month. Just at the end of the month, you'll have 30 things that you were impressed with, amazed with, or grateful for. And it can be an incredible tool to help us. Because when we were first involved with each other, and when everything was rosy and new, we were constantly amazed at how cool this other person was, how amazing they were, how thoughtful, how great. And as we live together, it's sometimes easier to focus on, I cannot believe that he thinks that way. I cannot believe that I asked and he did not do. So paying attention to the things that we're grateful for, this very intentional gratitude. But we would encourage you for 1 month, every single night. And you could even make it on, it was encouraged to write on paper.
Your perspective, because then we're digging in a different place. We're digging for gold instead of for, the negative. And then also, there is such a tremendous power in positive reinforcement. It's just across the board. That's science. It's when you can definitely go back and tell somebody that you liked what they did, you appreciate what they did, it's very likely that you will get more of that type of behavior out of that person. So it really will benefit you to do that.
And one other practice we would like for you to engage in, and we talked about it briefly a few weeks ago, but just the reinforcement of love and commitment when you're having a conflict, to be able to say, I'm really upset with this, or I feel so frustrated, but I want to remind you that I love you. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just really frustrated about this, and we'll figure a way to work it out. I think that sometimes in conflict, we always feel the disconnect, and if we're not mindful, we'll weaponize that against each other and try to use it to maybe create some emphasis on the pain that we're feeling. But to be able to intentionally tell your spouse, this is what I'm feeling. I don't know what we're going to do about this yet, but I'm affirming to you my love and commitment. We're not going anywhere. This is not what's going to separate us, but I'm hurt, or I'm frustrated, or I'm angry, or I'm disappointed, and then work that out. Those are practices that
and some people
real.
might find that to be very simple, but for me, I was definitely trained with my family of origin to weaponize that stuff. I mean, when you are mad, you take away your approval, you remove yourself from them, and there's a period of punishment, and that is by silence or by mean looks or by whatever. And then after you have deemed that person suffered enough, then you reintroduce yourself into the, and that was just such a way that I was trained, because that's how I was treated, that, I just assumed that's how all relationships work. And I got to tell you, that does damage. It feels good for the moment or whatever, and it maybe gets your point or manipulates a situation, but it's doing grave damage. And I got to tell you, vulnerability is the flip side of that coin. And I got to tell you, it was way late in the game and I wish someone would have taught me about this, but it was so late in the game when I just was so hurt by what Heather said, and I was ready to withdraw myself and punish in the way that I was, subconsciously kind of taught or trained. And I said, hey, what you just did there, it hurt me so bad. It embarrassed me, really. And I want to just shut down and not talk to you for a couple days and do what I've always done, but I'm trying something different. I wonder if by me saying this, if you would really, at first she thought I was joking. She's like, oh, you need me to look in your eyes, and I'm like, I really do. I really need for you to not, pull away now, because I felt just really embarrassed by that. And now by turning your attention towards me and that vulnerability, that risk, could have really backfired. I mean, I was vulnerable, so she could have made fun of the weak weirdo that's, saying all this kind of stuff. But by doing that, I realized, and it was the step in a new direction that has absolutely been life-changing. Instead of doing that old way and kind of punishing, just saying, hey, this is what happened. That really hurt me. That really embarrassed me. And would you be willing to maybe do something differently, because what you did just hurt me? And even if she doesn't want to do that, I've watched her be willing to do it because of the way that I approached it and by the vulnerability. And I'm telling you what, intimacy is only going to happen when we're vulnerable, and if you're not going to be run that risk of being vulnerable, you're not going to have that level of intimacy that you all desire. And so it is risky, but come on, this is the person you married. And, if you can't risk it with them, then we've got deeper issues. We need to get some therapy and counseling if you can't. And if you can, I understand where you might be right now, but you can work towards that, and that is a tremendous place of success.
So we would like to offer, upon the closing, a 3-minute song, and we would like for you to take a moment, and if you're not comfortable where you're sitting, find a seat that is comfortable for you to be able to turn and look directly into the eyes of your spouse. And you don't have to say anything, just as the music plays, listen to the words, and then you guys can talk about it on your ride home or a little bit later.
Red lights flashing on the highway. I wonder if we're gonna ever get home. I wonder if we're gonna ever get home tonight. Everywhere the water's getting rough. Your best intentions may not be enough. I wonder if we're gonna ever get home tonight. But if you break down, I'll drive out and find you. If you forget my love, I'll try to remind you. Stay by you when it don't come easy. When it don't come easy. don't know nothing except change will come. Year after year, what we do is undone. Time keeps moving from a crawl to a run. I wonder if we're gonna ever get home. You're out there walking down a highway, and all the signs got blown away. Sometimes you wonder if you're walking in the wrong direction. But if you break down, I'll drive out and find you. If you forget my love, I'll try to remind you. And I'll stay by you when it don't come easy. When it don't come easy. So many things that I had before, it don't matter to me now. Tonight I cry for the love I've lost, and for the love I never found. When the last bird falls and the last siren sounds, someone will say what's been said before. It's only love we're looking for. When you break down, I'll drive out and find you. When you forget my love, I'll try to remind you. And I'll stay by you when it don't come easy. When it don't come easy. It don't come easy. It don't come easy.
It's interesting how a practice like that can, first of all, make us all giggle like 8-year-olds, and then how quickly emotion comes from that intimacy like that, and it's a real good practice for us to try these things. Thank you for your vulnerability, your willingness. Thank you for coming out tonight. Appreciate you guys. We'll see you in church on Sunday, Wednesday, and we'll be here again next month.
Grace and peace to you.
The following was a sermon presented at First Love Church in Ocala, Florida. If you'd like to know more about our church or Pastors Dennis and Heather Drake, you can find out on the web at firstlovechurch.org. If you'd like to help us continue the work that we're doing, you can donate at firstlovechurch.org.